Someone takes a little longer than usual to reply, and suddenly your mind begins building a case. You reread your last message, you scan for the sentence that sounded wrong, you replay your tone in your head, you check whether they used a period instead of an exclamation mark, you ask yourself if they sounded colder in person, you wonder if that pause on the phone meant something, and sometimes, before anything has even happened, you feel the need to ask, "Are you upset with me?" It is such a common habit that many people barely notice it anymore. It can look small, almost harmless, a quick check-in, a need for reassurance, a tiny social reflex. But if you do this often, if you feel that sharp inner pull to monitor people's moods, decode their silence, and search for signs of disapproval, then the question is not only what you are doing, the deeper question is why? Why does your nervous system become so alert around the possibility that someone might be angry, disappointed, distant, or emotionally unavailable? Why do some people notice a slight shift in expression and move on, while others feel their whole body tighten? Why can a delayed response, a flat tone, or a short answer trigger so much overthinking, anxiety, and self-doubt? The hidden reason usually has less to do with the other person than you think, and much more to do with what your mind has learned that relationships mean. This is where psychology becomes very interesting, because the habit of checking whether someone is upset with you is rarely just a habit. It is often a strategy, a social survival strategy, a form of emotional threat detection, sometimes even a very old one. On the surface, it can seem like you are just trying to be considerate, and sometimes you are. There is nothing abnormal about caring how your behavior affects other people. In fact, social awareness is part of healthy human connection. We are built to read faces, voices, and emotional signals. Our brains are social organs. They are constantly interpreting tone, intention, and belonging. That part is normal. But there is a difference between awareness and vigilance. Awareness notices, vigilance scans. Awareness allows you to care, vigilance makes you brace. And when checking whether someone is upset with you becomes repetitive, automatic, and emotionally charged, psychology would suggest that your mind is no longer just gathering information. It is trying to prevent something, usually rejection, sometimes conflict, sometimes shame, sometimes abandonment. Sometimes the old familiar pain of feeling like love can become unstable without warning. One of the most useful ideas here comes from attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth and many others. Attachment theory explains how our early experiences with closeness, comfort, and emotional responsiveness shape the way we relate to people later in life, not in some simplistic, one cause explains everything way, but in a powerful enough way that it can influence our thoughts, feelings, behavior, and sense of safety in relationships. If, at some point in your life, connection felt uncertain, inconsistent, conditional, or emotionally unpredictable, your brain may have learned a very specific lesson. The lesson is not just people can be upset. The lesson is, I need to know immediately when someone's emotional state changes, because my safety, worth, or stability may depend on it. That creates a particular kind of person, often thoughtful, often highly empathetic, often socially intelligent, sometimes very kind, sometimes unusually good at reading a room. But underneath that skill, there can also be anxiety, because what looks like empathy from the outside can sometimes be hypervigilance on the inside. This is one of the hidden secrets of people who constantly check whether others are okay with them. They are not always simply sensitive. Many of them have trained themselves to become emotional weather forecasters. They watch the sky, they monitor the wind, they look for signs, and they do it because somewhere in their experience, storms mattered. Research on rejection sensitivity helps explain this even more clearly. Psychologists Geraldine Downey and Scott Feldman described rejection sensitivity as a tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection. That means the mind does not wait passively for information. It leans toward threat. It fills in gaps quickly. It interprets ambiguity as potential danger. So if someone says, "I'm fine," your mind may not hear a neutral statement. It may begin investigating. Were they too quiet? Too short? Did they mean fine or fine? Did I do something? Should I fix it now before it gets worse? This is why the habit can be so exhausting. You are not just having social thoughts. You are running emotional surveillance, and surveillance never really ends because it is fueled by uncertainty. It wants perfect reassurance in a world that cannot provide it. A lot of people who do this describe a constant low-grade anxiety in relationships. Not always dramatic anxiety, Sometimes it is subtle, a background hum, a mild but persistent tension, a sense that things are okay only until proven otherwise. So they keep checking through words, through tone, through body language, through text patterns, through silence. And what makes this especially difficult is that the behavior can feel responsible, mature even. You might tell yourself, I'm just making sure everything is okay. I'm just being emotionally aware. I'm just trying to communicate. But if your urge to ask is driven by panic rather than clarity, then the behavior is not really communication. It is regulation. You are trying to regulate your own nervous system by getting certainty from another person. That distinction matters because once you understand that, the behavior starts to make more sense. The real problem is not that you care too much. The real problem is that your emotional system may have learned to outsource safety. In other words, your peace depends too heavily on reading other people correctly and keeping them emotionally settled. That can happen for many reasons. Sometimes it begins in childhood, especially in homes where a parent's mood controlled the atmosphere. Maybe anger arrived suddenly. Maybe silence meant disapproval. Maybe affection had conditions attached to it. Maybe you learned that being easy, pleasant, high performing, or emotionally useful helped maintain connection. If so, you may have become unusually skilled at managing other people's feelings before you were ever taught how to manage your own. This is common in people who grew up around criticism, emotional inconsistency, addiction, volatility, or subtle forms of emotional neglect. Even if no one openly rejected you, you may have absorbed the feeling that relationships require monitoring. That closeness is not something you simply rest in, it is something you maintain through attention, adjustment, and self-correction. And once a child learns that, they often carry it into adult life as a personality trait. People may call them thoughtful, accommodating, intuitive, or even rare. They may seem socially smooth, but inside, they may be working very hard. They are tracking every shift. They are anticipating discomfort. They are trying not to become a problem. This is why the habit often has roots in shame as much as anxiety. Shame says, if someone is upset, it probably has something to do with me. Shame says, if there is distance, I caused it. Shame says, if the mood changes, I should repair it quickly before I lose connection. So the mind becomes very quick to personalize neutral events. Someone is tired, and you think they are mad. Someone is distracted, and you think you said something wrong. Someone needs space, and you experience it as emotional danger. This is not because you are irrational or weak. It is because your perception has been shaped by emotionally meaningful experiences. Psychology shows us again and again that the brain is not only a logic machine, it is a prediction machine. It uses memory, experience, and past pain to predict what is happening now. And that means sometimes you are not responding to the present moment, you are responding to the emotional pattern that the present moment resembles. That is a very important difference. A short text from a friend in the present can activate an old memory of disapproval from the past. A partner becoming quiet can awaken the same body-level alarm you once felt around a parent, teacher, or previous relationship. You may not consciously connect the two, but your nervous system often does. This is why these reactions can feel so immediate. The body moves before the mind has fully explained anything. You feel the tension first, then build the story second. Neuroscience gives us a useful framework here. When the brain senses social threat, especially threat tied to belonging or rejection, it can activate the same broad alarm systems involved in physical danger. Social pain is not trivial to the nervous system. Research by Naomi Eisenberger and others has shown that social exclusion and rejection can activate some of the same neural pathways associated with physical pain. To the brain, being cast out has always mattered. Historically, social disconnection could mean vulnerability, so your reaction is not random, it is rooted in something very old. But modern relationships create a strange problem. They generate endless ambiguity. Texting, delayed replies, shifting tone, digital silence, mixed signals, social media visibility without direct contact. These things create hundreds of tiny openings for anxious interpretation. If you already have rejection sensitivity, modern communication can become a playground for overthinking. You can see that someone is online but not replying. You can see that they viewed something but did not respond. You can compare how they texted yesterday to how they text today. You can measure enthusiasm using punctuation. And because the human mind is so good at pattern recognition, especially under anxiety, it starts finding meaning everywhere. This is how a habit becomes a loop. You feel uncertainty, you scan for signs, you ask for reassurance, you feel temporary relief, then the uncertainty returns, so you scan again. Over time, this can become a self-reinforcing behavior. In psychology, reassurance seeking often works like this. It reduces anxiety for a moment, which teaches the brain that the checking behavior helped, so the brain uses it again, not because it solved the deeper issue, but because it briefly lowered discomfort. That is the hidden trap. The checking feels like a solution, but it can actually strengthen the anxiety underneath. And this is why many people end up asking the same question in different forms over and over. Are you okay? Did I do something? Are you mad at me? You seem off. Is everything fine between us? Now, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with direct communication. Sometimes asking is healthy. Sometimes there really is tension, and naming it honestly is far better than pretending not to notice. The issue is not the sentence itself. The issue is the emotional engine behind it. Are you asking to connect or asking to stop the panic? Are you noticing a real pattern or reacting to a familiar fear? Are you seeking clarity or trying to prevent abandonment before it happens? That is where self-understanding becomes more important than perfect social accuracy, because a lot of people who are stuck in this habit believe their main task is to get better at reading others. But often the deeper work is learning to read themselves, to notice, for example, when anxiety is turning possibility into certainty, when a feeling is becoming a fact, when an old emotional memory is disguising itself as present-day intuition. This matters because people who do this habitually often trust other people's moods more than their own perception. They become experts in external signals, but strangers to internal safety. Their attention goes outward constantly. What are they feeling? What do they mean? Are they okay with me? Meanwhile, their own feelings, needs, boundaries, and emotional exhaustion go unexamined. That can create a very painful imbalance. You begin to organize your behavior around keeping connections stable. You become agreeable too quickly. You apologize before you understand what happened. You over-explain. You smooth over tension that is not yours to manage. You confuse being loved with being emotionally useful. And after enough time, you may not even realize how much energy this takes. This is one reason people with this pattern often feel tired in relationships, not always lonely in the obvious sense, but internally overworked. Because they are not just relating, they are monitoring, they are adjusting, they are trying to stay one step ahead of emotional loss. There is another hidden layer too. Sometimes the constant checking is connected not only to fear of rejection, but to a more fragile sense of self-worth. If your self-esteem is unstable, other people's moods can start to function like mirrors. If they seem warm, you feel okay. If they seem distant, your value drops. Their emotional state becomes evidence about you. This makes every interaction feel higher stakes than it really is. Now your mind is not merely asking, are they upset? It is asking, am I still acceptable? Am I still wanted? Am I still safe in this relationship? Am I still enough? That is a heavy burden for ordinary social moments to carry. And because this process happens so fast, many people do not realize that their anxiety is really attached to identity. What hurts is not just the thought that someone might be upset. What hurts is what that possibility seems to say about the self. This is why reassurance often does not last very long. If the deeper issue is shaky self-worth, no amount of external comfort fully repairs it. You may hear, "No, I'm not mad," and feel relieved for a little while, but soon your mind looks for the next sign because the insecurity underneath is still active. And this brings us to something very important. The behavior you are trying to fix may have once been intelligent. That is worth saying carefully. If you became highly attuned to other people's moods because your environment required it, then this pattern was not a character flaw, it was adaptation. It may have helped you avoid conflict. It may have helped you preserve attachment. It may have helped you stay emotionally prepared. In some seasons of life, it may even have been a rare and useful survival skill. The problem is not that your mind learned it. The problem is that it kept using it after the original conditions changed. That is one of the most humane explanations in psychology. Many habits that create suffering in adulthood are old solutions that outlived their environment. So when you keep checking if someone is upset with you, it may help to ask a more compassionate question. What is this behavior trying to protect me from? Not, what is wrong with me, but what is my mind afraid will happen if I do not check? For many people, the answer is not simple. It may be conflict, it may be humiliation, it may be being misunderstood, it may be emotional withdrawal, it may be the sickening feeling of not knowing where you stand. It may even be the old childhood experience of sensing that when someone important changed mood, the entire atmosphere changed with them. Once you understand that, your behavior starts to look less like neediness and more like a nervous system attempting to stay ahead of pain, and that recognition can be deeply relieving, because one of the most damaging things people hear is that they are just too sensitive, too much, too anxious, too needy, too dramatic. But many times, what they actually are is finely adapted to emotional unpredictability. That does not mean the pattern is healthy. It means it is understandable, and understanding changes everything. It changes the tone you use with yourself. It changes the shame around the habit. It changes the possibility of actually repairing it, because habits rooted in fear do not disappear through self-criticism. They shift through safety, awareness, and repeated corrective experiences. So what does that look like in practice? First, it means learning to pause before interpreting. Not every shift in tone is a message about you. Not every silence is disapproval. Not every short response is emotional distance. Sometimes people are tired, distracted, flooded, busy, uncertain, or inside their own thoughts. A mature social mind leaves room for multiple explanations. Second, it means noticing your body's response. The urge to check often begins as physical activation before it becomes language. Tight chest, stomach drop, racing thoughts, a need to fix. If you can catch the sensation before you obey the impulse, you create a small space between fear and behavior. That space is where freedom starts. Third, it means becoming curious about your own history. When did this pattern become familiar? Who did you have to read carefully? What emotional atmosphere trained you to monitor? What did being wrong about someone's mood cost you back then? These questions are not about blaming the past. They are about understanding the blueprint. Fourth, it means building internal reassurance, not only external reassurance. This does not mean pretending you do not care. It means developing the capacity to tell yourself, uncertainty is uncomfortable, but I can survive it. Someone else's mood is not automatically my responsibility. I do not need immediate certainty to remain grounded. That is a powerful shift in self-trust. Fifth, it means allowing relationships to reveal themselves over time instead of trying to control them in advance. Healthy connection can tolerate occasional misunderstanding. It can tolerate space. It can tolerate imperfect timing. If a relationship collapses every time uncertainty appears, then the answer was never going to come from better monitoring. And perhaps most importantly, it means separating empathy from self-erasure. You can care about people without over-functioning for them. You can be thoughtful without becoming hyper-vigilant. You can communicate directly without making yourself responsible for every emotional fluctuation in the room. That is not coldness. That is emotional differentiation. And for many people, learning this feels strange at first. If you are used to scanning constantly, relaxing can feel irresponsible. Trusting can feel naive. Not checking can feel dangerous. But that discomfort is often part of the rewiring. When an old protection strategy loosens, the nervous system can interpret peace as a risk simply because peace is unfamiliar. This is why healing this pattern is not just about changing your thoughts. It is also about teaching your body that connection can be steady without constant surveillance, that silence is not always abandonment, that someone else's bad mood does not automatically become your fault, that your worth does not rise and fall with every text, glance, or pause. And once that begins to settle in, something changes. You stop chasing signs so aggressively. You become less dependent on microsignals. You ask clearer questions when something genuinely matters. You stop assuming that every social ambiguity contains a hidden accusation. Most of all, you start to feel more solid inside your own experience. That is the real opposite of this pattern. Not indifference, not emotional numbness, not becoming less caring. It is inner stability, the kind that lets you notice tension without collapsing into it, the kind that lets you respect other people's emotions without absorbing them as verdicts, the kind that allows you to remain connected to yourself even when you are unsure about someone else. So if you keep checking whether someone is upset with you, the hidden reason may not be that you are weak, overdramatic, or broken. It may be that your mind learned early that relational safety had to be monitored carefully, that emotional closeness felt conditional enough for you to become an expert in signs, moods, and subtle shifts, that your anxiety is not random, but organized around protecting connection. That is a very human thing, and once you understand that, the habit starts to lose some of its mystery. You see it for what it is, not just a quirk, but a meaningful behavior with a history, a psychology, and a purpose. The good news is that what was learned can also be updated, not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually, with awareness, with self-respect, with better boundaries, with relationships that do not require you to constantly perform emotional maintenance, with enough safety that your nervous system no longer has to treat every pause like a warning sign. Sometimes, the most important shift is simply this. Instead of asking, "Are they upset with me?" you begin asking, "What is happening inside me right now?" That question is quieter, but far more powerful, because it brings you back to the one place where real change begins, not in perfecting your ability to read everyone else, but in understanding the fear, memory, and hope underneath your own behavior. And that understanding, more than reassurance, is what finally starts to set you free.